The knock on the iron gate echoed like a warning. No one answered. Elias had visited hundreds of homes for the census, but this one felt wrong before he even stepped inside. The mansion loomed behind rusted bars, as if it had been waiting for him. He checked the file again, tracing the family name with his thumb. 4 registered members, unchanged for decades, despite obvious signs of growth and wealth. Numbers like that didn't just stay still without reason. The gate creaked open on its own, or so it seemed to him. A long driveway stretched toward the house, lined with trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. By the time he reached the door, the world behind him felt far away. A woman greeted him with a smile that never reached her eyes. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, as if she had answered these questions many times before, yet something in her tone suggested she feared the answers. Inside, the air felt heavy, like it hadn't moved in years. Portraits of family members stared down from the walls, their faces unnervingly identical across generations. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that some of them were watching him breathe. He began asking routine questions, marking boxes on his form. The woman answered quickly, almost too quickly, never hesitating or correcting herself. It was as if she had memorized a script long ago. For residents, she confirmed again, her fingers tightening slightly on the edge of the table. Elias noticed there were 5 chairs around it. One chair looked worn, as though it had been used far more than the others. A faint sound interrupted the silence, something like a distant scrape. Elias paused mid-sentence, listening carefully as the noise faded into nothing. The woman's smile stiffened, her eyes flickering toward the hallway. He asked about the extra chair, trying to keep his voice neutral. She laughed softly, calling it an old habit, something meaningless. But her laugh lingered too long, stretching thin over the room. Another sound followed, this time sharper, like fingernails dragging across wood. Elias felt his chest tighten as he turned his head toward the source. The hallway beyond the living room seemed darker than it should have been. The woman quickly stood, stepping between him and the hallway. She insisted it was just the house settling, nothing more than old walls shifting. Yet her hands trembled as she spoke, betraying her calm words. Elias marked his paper slowly, but his attention was no longer on the form. Something in that house did not belong in any official record, and for the first time in his career, he wondered if some things were never meant to be counted. The whisper came again, softer this time, like breath slipping through a crack in the walls. Elias froze where he stood, his pen hovering above the page. It didn't sound like the house settling anymore. The woman continued speaking, listing dates and names that blurred together in his mind. Her voice felt distant now, as though he were hearing it from underwater. All his attention had shifted to the hallway behind her. A long corridor stretched into darkness, its ends swallowed by shadow. The lights along it flickered faintly, casting uneven patches of yellow across the floor. Something about that darkness felt occupied. Elias excused himself, claiming he needed to verify structural details for the record. The woman hesitated, her smile faltering for the briefest second. Then she nodded, but her eyes followed him too closely. Each step toward the hallway felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder, carrying a faint metallic smell that made his throat tighten. It reminded him of something he couldn't quite place. He paused at the entrance, listening carefully. For a moment, there was nothing but silence pressing against his ears. Then came a faint scratching sound, slow and deliberate, like something tracing the inside of a wall. Elias leaned closer, his heartbeat beginning to drum loudly in his chest. The sound shifted, turning into a soft murmur, almost like words spoken through clenched teeth. He couldn't make out what it said, but it felt directed at him. A door stood halfway down the corridor, its surface marked with deep scratches. The wood around the handle looked worn, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. He took a cautious step forward, then another. The murmur grew slightly louder, layered with a faint rhythmic tapping. It sounded almost like someone counting under their breath. Before he could reach the door, the woman's voice cut sharply through the silence. She called his name with forced calm, asking him to return to the living room. Her tone carried a warning she wasn't willing to say out loud. Elias turned back slowly, forcing a polite expression onto his face. He apologized, claiming he had wandered by mistake. The woman's smile returned, but now it looked strained, almost brittle. As he followed her back, the scratching stopped abruptly. The silence that replaced it felt heavier than before, as if something had realized it was being listened to. And deep in his gut, Elias knew he had just walked away from something that had been waiting for him. The house did not sleep that night, and neither did Elias. The sounds he had heard earlier echoed in his mind, replaying with growing clarity. Whatever was behind that door had not been random noise. He sat in the guest room they had insisted he use, staring at the ceiling as the hours crawled past. The walls seemed thinner after midnight, carrying faint vibrations from somewhere deep within the mansion. It felt like the house itself was breathing. At first it was just a soft thud, distant and irregular. Then came the scratching again, slower now, more deliberate than before. Elias held his breath, realizing the sound was closer than it should have been. He rose quietly, careful not to make the floorboards creak. The hallway outside his room stretched into darkness, lit only by a single dim bulb flickering overhead. Shadows clung to the corners like something alive. The forbidden corridor looked different at night, longer somehow, as if it had extended itself. The air there felt colder, damp against his skin, carrying that same metallic scent. Elias stepped into it, unable to resist any longer. As he approached the scratched door, he noticed new marks layered over the old ones, fresh grooves cut into the wood, as if something had been trying again, more urgently this time. The handle trembled slightly, though no one touched it. A faint whisper slipped through the gap beneath the door. It was clearer now, shaped into broken words that twisted together. Elias crouched closer, straining to understand what it was saying. 4-5 wrong, wrong, the voice murmured, uneven and breathless. Each word dragged out as if it had been unused for years. Elias felt a cold dread settle deep in his chest. His hand hovered over the handle, hesitation gripping him tightly. Every instinct told him to walk away, to forget what he had heard. But curiosity pulled harder, sharp and unrelenting. He turned the handle slowly, wincing at the faint click it made. The door resisted at first, then gave way with a long, hollow creak. Darkness spilled out from the room like something alive. Inside, the air was stale and suffocating, thick with neglect. The beam of his flashlight revealed scattered objects across the floor. Toys, broken and dust-covered, lay in unnatural arrangements. The walls were covered in markings, lines scratched over and over again in frantic repetition. Some were tallies, counting endlessly without pattern or order. And among them, one message stood out, carved deeper than the rest. I am still here. The words on the wall refused to leave Elias's mind, even after he stepped back into the corridor. I am still here echoed louder than the scratching ever had. It didn't feel like a message left behind, but something ongoing. He returned to his room, but sleep was no longer possible. Every creak of the mansion sounded deliberate, like footsteps pacing just beyond his reach. The silence between those sounds felt even worse. Near dawn, he made a decision that tightened something deep in his chest. This was no longer just a routine census visit. Something had been hidden here with purpose, and he needed proof. The study was easier to find than he expected, as if the house wanted him to discover it. Heavy shelves lined the walls, filled with neatly arranged documents and ledgers. Everything looked organized, but not natural. Elias began searching carefully, pulling out files that dated back decades. Birth certificates, property records, and census copies were stacked in perfect order. Each document confirmed the same 4 names, repeated without change. But the older records told a slightly different story. In faded ink, he found references to a 5th child, mentioned only briefly. The name was scratched out in every instance, as though erased in haste. His pulse quickened as he flipped through more pages. Each correction looked intentional, not accidental, with the same hand striking out the same name again and again. Someone had been rewriting history for years. Then he found something worse. A sealed envelope hidden between 2 ledgers, its edges yellowed with age. Inside were photographs that felt colder than the room itself. The images showed a child standing apart from the rest of the family. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but the longer he looked, the more something felt off. The child's eyes were always unfocused, never meeting the camera. In later photos, the child appeared thinner, paler, as if fading over time. Strange marks covered their arms, not injuries, but symbols etched into the skin. Elias felt a wave of unease tighten his throat. One photograph stopped him completely. The family stood together in the main hall, smiling as always, but behind them, barely visible. The child's face was pressed against a doorway in shadow. Elias lowered the photograph slowly, his hands beginning to shake. The records, the erased name, the hidden room, it all pointed to something deliberate. This wasn't about hiding a child from the world, but hiding the world from that child. The whisper reached him before he saw it, curling through the hallway like something alive. Elias stepped back from the study, clutching the photograph as the air grew heavier around him. He realized, with a slow rising dread, that the thing behind the door was no longer contained. The corridor stretched ahead, darker than it had been before. The faint light flickered violently now, casting broken shadows that seemed to move on their own. Somewhere in that darkness, something was breathing. He heard the counting again, clearer than ever. 4, 5, 6. The voice had changed, no longer weak or broken, but steady and aware. Elias's throat tightened as he turned toward the forbidden wing. The scratched door stood open now, its frame splintered as if forced from the inside. A trail of deep marks ran along the floor, leading out into the hall. He should have run. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. But something held him there, a pull he couldn't explain. It felt like the house itself wanted him to witness what was coming. The air turned colder with every step he took. That metallic smell grew stronger, thick enough to taste. Elias followed the marks, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out his thoughts. At the end of the corridor, he saw it. A figure stood partially hidden in the darkness, its outline thin and unnatural. It didn't move at first, as if waiting for him to notice. "Were you counting too?" the voice asked, calm and almost curious. It echoed strangely, layered with something that didn't belong to a human throat. Elias felt his knees weaken. The figure stepped forward into the dim light. Its body looked like it had once been a child's, but stretched and twisted by years of isolation. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, covered in faint, carved symbols that seemed to shift when he looked too closely. Its eyes locked onto his, and Elias felt something crawl into his mind. Not thoughts, but awareness, as if it were reading him piece by piece. He realized then that it wasn't just looking at him, it was understanding him. "They always stopped at 4, it said softly, tilting its head. "But I kept counting." The words carried a quiet satisfaction that made his stomach turn. Elias stumbled back, but the figure didn't chase him. It simply watched, its expression almost calm, almost patient. And in that moment, he understood the truth that terrified him most. This thing had never been trapped in that room. It had been waiting to be acknowledged. The moment Elias met its gaze, something inside him shifted, like a number being added where it did not belong. The air around him felt thinner, harder to breathe, as if the house itself had begun to close in. He realized too late that seeing it had changed everything. Behind him, a floorboard creaked softly. Elias turned just enough to see the family standing at the far end of the corridor, watching in silence. Their expressions were calm, but their eyes carried something deeper than fear. "You shouldn't have opened the door," the woman said quietly. Her voice no longer sounded rehearsed, but tired, as if she had spoken those words many times before. Elias could hear the weight of years behind them. He shook his head, struggling to find his voice. "You hid it," he managed to say, though the words felt weak now. Even as he spoke, he knew he didn't fully understand what they had done. "We didn't hide it," the man replied, stepping forward slowly. His tone was steady, but there was a quiet desperation beneath it. "We kept the count wrong." The figure behind Elias let out a soft sound, almost like laughter. It moved closer, its presence pressing against him without touching. Elias felt that same crawling awareness slip deeper into his thoughts. "They thought numbers could protect them," it said, its voice echoing from too many places at once. "If I wasn't counted, I wasn't real." Elias's grip tightened around his papers, the census forms now trembling in his hands. Every instinct told him to correct the record, to write down what he had seen. But something inside him hesitated. The family's eyes were fixed on him, not with anger, but with pleading. They weren't trying to protect themselves anymore. They were trying to protect everyone else. "For 40 years, we kept it at 4, the woman whispered. "Because the moment it becomes 5, it doesn't stay here." The thing tilted its head again, watching Elias with quiet anticipation. Its carved skin seemed to shift, the symbols aligning in patterns that made his vision blur. He felt as though he were being measured, counted from the inside out. Slowly, almost without realizing it, Elias looked down at his form. The box for total residence remained blank, waiting for his final entry. His pen hovered over the paper, shaking uncontrollably. 5, he whispered, the words slipping out before he could stop it. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Then the thing smiled not with joy, but with completion. The house groaned around them, as if something vast had just been acknowledged. When the authorities arrived days later, the mansion stood empty, its gates wide open. No records remained inside, no trace of the family or the officer who had visited. Only one thing was found, left behind on a wooden table, A single census form, its ink smeared but still readable. Under total residence, the number had been written over and over again, covering the page completely. And no matter how many times they counted it, the number never stayed the same.